In this lesson, you're going to write equations of circles, and the goal here is that given the equation of a circle in general form, so we can talk about general form, you want to write it in standard form. Now, you are familiar with standard form. So if you go back to previous lessons, you were given equation in standard form, and you had to find the center, and you had to graph. But let's recall what standard form is. Remember, standard form is this. So this is standard form. All right, so standard form is this: x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So that's standard form. So remember the center, when it's in standard form, so remember the center is hk. That's your center. So it's not negative h, negative k, it's hk. So remember when we worked these problems previously, when we graphed these, when we found the center, we always thought of this as x minus h and then y minus k. All right, so if you don't recall that, go back to the lessons that dealt with that. And then the radius is r, so where r is the radius. Okay, so the length of the radius. All right, now, so what we want to do, though, is given a equation of a circle in general form. So this is general form, so listen carefully. So that's something new, general form. So general form of the equation of a circle looks like this: x squared plus y squared plus, I'm going to use the letter e. So I'll use d. So d times x plus e times y plus some constant f equals 0. All right, so that's a lot of stuff there, right? Basically, you just got to remember that if you were to FOIL this out and then do the same thing here, you would get, and then square root of r is, it would look like this. It would be some expression where you have x squared plus y squared plus some number times x plus some number times y plus a constant. Okay, so that's what this is. So if you were to remember the binomial squared, you could FOIL this. If you were to FOIL these out, you would get something like this. You would get these terms. Okay, so the thing, though, you got to remember is this. So you are dealing with a circle. You got to understand why this is the equation of a circle. Because remember, this is a standard form, right? So if I were to FOIL this, x times x is x squared, and then if I were to FOIL this, y times y would be y squared. Okay, so keep in mind, though, as we go through these problems, one of the things we're going to talk about is that at some point you want these coefficient of x squared and y squared to be 1. It's very important that the coefficient of x squared and y squared be 1. So we're going to talk about that at some point. Okay, so then the goal is this, though. How am I going to transform this to look like this? Because that's what I want to do. So I want to get this to look like this. Okay, it's not difficult. You're going to use completing the square. So to write the equation of a circle, that is written, that is in general form, to standard form, you will use completing the square. Okay, so you can complete the square. And so you had to complete the square on solving quadratic equations. So if you go back to that lesson where we solved quadratic equations by completing the square, it's the same idea. All right, except this time, so when we did completing the square with quadratic equations, you had one set of variables, x. Okay, here you have two sets of variables, x and y. So you're going to complete the square twice. All right, so here are basically the steps that you're going to go through, and you're going to see this. So these are the steps for completing the square with circles. Step 1 is you're going to rearrange the terms so that x terms and y terms are together, and then move any constants to the right side of the equation or to the other side. So it looks something like this. Okay? Then step 2 is you're going to find the coefficients of the first degree terms, x and y, and then you're going to divide by 2 and then square it. And then you're going to add that to both sides of the equation. And then you're going to factor the resulting trinomials, and it's going to be a binomial square. It'll be a perfect square trinomial. So if you go back to the lesson, where we complete the square for quadratic equations, you're going to see how familiar this is, except we have two sets of variables, x and y's, instead of just x's. Okay? All right, so we're going to come back to these steps in a little while. All right, so that's going to be what we're going to use. So to go from general form to standard form, we have to complete the square. All right? Okay, so let's look at an example. So example number 1. So I have this equation. It is in general form. So every term's on one side, right? Every term's on one side. You have 0 on the other side. So that's general form. Keep in mind, though, you have to know that this is the equation of a circle. It's the equation of a circle because I have an x squared, I have a y squared, and the coefficients are 1s. Coefficients are 1. So that's going to be the equation of a circle. It doesn't matter what the coefficient of x is, the coefficient of y is. That should be a y right here. What y is, or the constant, does not matter. As long as the coefficient of x squared and y squared is 1, we have a circle. Okay? All right, now, let's go through the steps. All right, step 1. We're going to rearrange the terms so that the x terms are together and the y terms are together. Now listen to what I'm going to say as we go through the process. So we got to put the x terms together, and we got to put the y terms together, and we're going to bring the constant to the other side. Okay? All right. So as we do this, though, I want you to do this. So we're going to say x squared plus 10x. I'll put the x's together. Leave a blank there. Go ahead and do that. You're going to see y in a little while. Leave a blank there. Then I'm going to say plus y squared. I'm going to put the y's together. Plus y squared minus 8y. Leave a blank there. And then I'm going to bring the negative 7 to the other side, and then add 7 to both sides, right? So this equals 7. So it's important you understand why this is a positive 7, because you got to bring the constant to the other side, so you got to add 7 to both sides. All right, now, so that was step 1, okay? That was step 1. Step 2, now listen carefully. Step 2, and if you go back to the process when we solve quadratic equations by completing the square, the idea is the same. You are now going to take the coefficient of the first degree term. Let's start with x. The first degree term means that the exponent's 1, x to the first power. It is 10. All right, so go off to the side and think about this. All right, so I'm going to take the coefficient of x, which is 10. Remember what you got to do now. You got to divide by 2, right? Divide by 2, and then you square that. That's what this says. Find the coefficient of first degree term, divide by 2, and then square it. So 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 5 squared is 25. So make sure you go all the way like this. Then what I do now is I take 25, and I do the same thing with y, but let's just do 25 first. Then once you do that, the next thing you're going to do is add the number to both sides of the equation. So in other words, you're going to put the 25 with the x's. Remember, that's plus 25, so you can say plus 25. And by the way, it's always going to be plus a number. It's always going to be plus this. And so over here, and do the same thing here, plus 25. So what you do one side, you add to the other. All right, let's do the y. All right, now be careful. So the coefficient of y here is a negative 8. So we got to say negative 8. And then I have to divide by 2, and whatever that is, I'm going to square it, right? And so let's simplify this. Negative 8 divided by 2 is a negative 4. Negative 4 squared is a positive 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. Okay? All right, now if I'm doing this correctly, the resulting trinomial, meaning this, the resulting trinomial, those two trinomials should now be a perfect square trinomial. Perfect square trinomial. And remember from a previous course, a perfect square trinomial is a trinomial that can be written as a binomial squared. So you can write as a binomial times itself. So if I did this correctly, I can now factor this as a binomial squared, as a binomial times itself, and I can, because x squared plus 10x plus 25 factors as x plus 5 squared. Okay? And then if I did this correctly, I should now be able to factor this as a binomial squared. Don't forget to say plus though. So plus, and then that's going to be y minus 4 squared. So make sure you notice the sign here. Okay? So if you were to actually FOIL this out, you would get this back. So remember a while ago when I asked you to make sure you keep the sign, see that negative 4 right here? That's what this is. All right, so it does help to keep that sign in there. And then just take your calculator and then just kind of add these numbers here. And so when you do that, you're going to get, let's see, 7 plus 25 plus 16. So I get 48. Okay, 48. All right. And so therefore, this right here is the equation of a circle in standard form. That's the equation of a circle in standard form. Okay? So this is the equation of a circle in standard form. So notice I went from this general form to standard form. Now, they did ask you to state the center, so the center is, so remember how to do that, x, don't say 5, negative 4, you know that's incorrect. So remember, it's got to be x minus h. So remember right here, x minus h, y minus k. So in your mind, if you think about this, if you write this over right here, x plus 5 squared plus y minus 4 squared equals 48. If you write this over, you do agree that x plus 5 is the same thing as x minus a negative 5 squared, right? So this is h right here. So h is negative 5, and this is already y minus k, and so k is 4. So your center is negative 5, 4. And the radius, remember, this is r squared. Okay, so keep in mind that that is r squared. So r squared is 48. So if I want to find the radius, I've got to take the square root of both sides. So I get r equals the square root of 48. Now sometimes they're going to ask you to simplify the radical if you can. So let's go ahead and simplify this. In terms of 48, you want to look at the perfect square that goes into 48. So if I take 48 and divide by 4, because 4 is a perfect square, I get 12. But that's even. 12 is also divisible by 4 as well. So 4 times 4 is 16. So in fact, 16 is the largest perfect square that goes into 48. So you're going to say the square root of 16 times the square root of 3. And so you get 4 square root of 3. So the radius is 4 square root of 3. All right, so make sure whenever possible, you simplify the radical. All right, so that's number 1. Okay, so let's look at number 2. So in number 2, we have this. So let's suppose in number 2 we have, so number 2, we have x squared minus 7x plus y squared minus 5y equal 0. All right, so x squared minus 7x plus y squared minus 5y equals 0. Okay, so it is in general form because I do have all the terms on one side, 0 on the other. Okay. Now, remember the steps. The first step is to rearrange the terms so that the x terms are together and the y terms are together, and they are. You see, they're already like this. But let's go ahead and leave some space here. Remember that space that we talked about? So what I would do is I would say this. So remember, you're always going to be adding a number here. Plus y squared minus 5y plus a number equal 0. Okay? All right. So that was step 1. So we already taken care of step 1. Now let's do step 2. So step 2 says I take the coefficient of x, so negative 7. I divide it by 2. Okay? And then I square that. Now the difference between this one and the one we just did was that I simplified 10 halves and I got 5, and that was easy to deal with. I simplified negative 8 halves, got negative 4, and that was an easy situation. Here though, negative 7 halves, I can't simplify that, so I'm going to have to square it the way it is. So negative 7 halves, remember, means negative 7 halves times negative 7 halves. So that's a negative 7 times a negative 7, which is 49, divided by 2 times 2 is 4. So and remember what we did here. So once you got that 25, that's where you added it to both sides. All right, so now that's going to be part of, so that was step 2. This is step 3, is you add to both sides. But you got to put it here. So you got to say plus 49 fourths. Plus 49 fourths. Just like that. Okay? What you do to one side, you add to the other. Now at some point, this right here should now be a perfect square trinomial. Okay? That's going to be a later step. But that's the goal. So that's completing the square. So completing the square is where you're going to end up getting a binomial square. So you get a perfect square trinomial. Okay, let's do this one now. So I take the coefficient of y, which is negative 5. I take half of that, and I square it just like this. And I'm going to do the same thing. I can't simplify this, so I'm going to have to get a fraction. So I get negative 5 halves times negative 5 halves, which is a positive 25 fourths. So I take that number, and I add it to both sides. So plus 25 fourths. Plus 25 fourths. Okay? And so now, this should now also be a perfect square trinomial. All right, and it is. Okay, so some students, they get thrown off because of that fraction here. Don't let it throw you off. It's easy to think about this. So remember when we did the previous one, if you go back to that previous problem, so you see where that constant here was 25? Well, what times itself is 25? 5, right? What times itself is 16? 4. Okay? So do the same thing. What times itself is 49 divided by 4? Well, 7 divided by 2, except we're going to use that negative, though, because that's negative right here. So we're going to say x minus 7 divided by 2, because 7 divided by 2 times 7 divided by 2 is 49 divided by 4. Okay? So don't make it difficult. And over here, and make sure you understand why this is negative, why we're subtracting, because the middle sign here is negative. Do the same thing here. So y minus the middle sign. What times itself is 25 over 4? Well, 5 over 2, right? So, but it'll be a negative. See how this is negative 5 over 2? That goes here, minus 5 over 2. And then that's going to equal, now we just got to figure out what that is. So 49, since the denominators are the same, that's going to be easy. We just add the numerators together. So we get 49 plus 25 gives me 74. So that's 74 divided by 4. Okay? So 74 divided by 4. And so now, and by the way, you can go ahead and simplify this. Let's go ahead and simplify this side right here. So this becomes x minus 7 halves squared plus y minus 5 halves squared equal, and then they're both divisible by 2. So 74 divided by 2 will give you 37. And then 4 divided by 2 is 2. Okay? All right, now, that's going to be a little bit more complicated in a little while. You'll see. So the center is easy, though. So what's the center? And by the way, that's the answer for the equation of a circle right here. Okay, so that's the equation of a circle in standard form. All right, the center will be a, don't say negative 7 halves. Remember, it's x minus h, so there's your h right here. 7 halves. Remember, x comes first, the ordered pair, x, y. And then y minus k, so k is 5/2. So there's your center. So that's an easy thing. But here's where some of you are going to get mixed up, the radius. All right, so when we did number 1, that one wasn't difficult because this number here was an integer, right? It was a nice number. It was an integer. Here, though, we have a fraction right here, 37/2. But we do the same thing. So the radius, remember how I found the radius? So remember, this right here represents r squared. You agree? Just like over here, remember that number right here is r squared. So whatever this number is, that's r squared. So this number here is r squared. So what that says is this, r squared equals 37 divided by 2. And what I've got to do now is to get r by itself, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides, just like this. And then the square and the square root undo each other, so you get r equals the square root of 37 divided by the square root of 2. Now, what I probably would have done then is this. And I'll come back to it. So you got to rationalize the denominator, right? So that becomes the square root of 37 divided by the square root of 2. Now remember, to rationalize the denominator, remember the square root of 2 is irrational, so you want to make it rational. You want to make that denominator rational, so you multiply numerator and denominator square root of 2. So that becomes the square root of 37 times 2 is 74, and the square root of 2 to the square root of 2 is the square root of 4, which is 2. So that brings me back to this. So remember how I simplified this? If all they wanted was standard form, then yeah, this is what you would write. But they also wanted you to state the radius. So what I would have done then is just go ahead, because I just noticed this, just go ahead and leave it like this, because watch. So r squared equals 74 divided by 4. Take the square root of both sides, and notice what happens. R equals the square root of 74 divided by the square root of 4, which is what this is, right? And so you get the square root of 74 divided by 2, right? And you see if you can simplify the square root of 74. So 74, if you go ahead, and let's go ahead, even though 2 is not a perfect square, let's see what we get when we divide by 2. So we get 37, and because I want to see a 4, but 37 is not even, so 37 is prime, so I cannot simplify the square root of 74. So I'm going to leave it like this. So the radius is the square root of 74 divided by 2. So that was a little bit more complicated in terms of this part here. This part here was the more complicated part. Okay? All right, let's look at number 3. So number 3, we have this. So number 3, you have y squared plus 8y plus 16 equal 12x minus x squared minus 5. Okay? Now, so notice that in the previous two problems, they were already written in general form. So you see that was general form, that was general form. But in number 3, it's not. So what I would do first is I would just go ahead and write in general form. Just go ahead and bring everything to one side. Okay? So in other words, you have y squared plus 8y plus 16, and then remember, to bring 12x to the other side, you have to subtract 12x. So you would say minus 12x, then you would have to add x squared, so then you'd say plus x squared, then you have to add 5 to both sides, so you'd say plus 5, and then all that would equal 0. So when you transpose those terms to the other side, the sign changes. And then I'm going to go ahead, so I have it in general form, although I can combine the 6 and the 5, so let's go ahead and do that. So, and I'm going to put the x squared first. So I get x squared plus y squared, x squared plus y squared. Then I'm going to put x squared, and then I'm going to put, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean x squared, I meant minus 12x. Let me go ahead and rewrite this. So x squared plus y squared minus 12x plus 8y, and then 16 and 5 is 21, and that's equals 0. Okay? All right. So now it's in general form. So now I can go ahead and do those steps. All right, so remember step one. Step one is to group your x's together, group the y's together, which we did not do yet, so that's going to be step one. So I'm going to get x squared minus 12x plus some number, right? So we'll go ahead and leave a space there, plus y squared plus 8y plus some number, leave a space there, and let's subtract 21 from both sides, so that's going to be minus 21. Okay? All right, so that was step one. Now step two says I got to take those coefficient of the x's, take the coefficient of the first degree terms for both x and y, divide by 2, square it, and then add it to both sides. So we're going to do step 2 and 3. So I'm going to take the coefficient of x, which is negative 12. So go off to the side and just think about this. So negative 12, what do I do to negative 12? I have to take half of it. And then whatever that is, I'm going to square it. Now ask yourself, can I simplify this? Yes, you can. That's negative 6. And what's negative 6 squared? 36. So then you're going to add 36 to both sides. Don't forget, what you do one side, you have to do the other. Some students always forget about doing the other side. So remember, you got to keep that equation balanced. What you do to one side, you do to the other. All right. Now, if I did this correctly, remember, if I did this correctly, this should now be a perfect square trinomial, meaning that I can write this as a binomial squared. And can I? What do you think it is? What do you think this is? Well, it'll be x. I see a minus sign. So it'll be x minus. And then what times itself is 36? 6. Okay. So if you were to follow this out, you would get this back. All right, let's do this one. So I take the coefficient of y, which is 8, and what do I do to it? I take half of it, so divide by 2. And whatever that is, I'm going to square it. And can I simplify this? Yes, so let's go ahead and do that. So it'll be 4 squared, and 4 squared is 16. So I take 16, and I add it to both sides. And so if I'm doing this correctly, don't forget to say plus here. If I'm doing this correctly, then this should be a binomial squared. So you get y plus, what times itself is 16? 4. And it kind of makes sense because that was a 4, right? So that's a 4. You saw a negative 6. Do you see that? Okay. And then equal, and let's go ahead and combine those numbers. So I get negative 21 plus 36, negative 21 plus 36, and then plus 16 equal 31. Okay. And so this right here is the equation of the circle in standard form. So it's the equation of the circle in standard form. So this was general form right here. So I start out with this equation, wrote it in general form first of all, and then I now have it in standard form. Okay? Now the center is easy. What's the center? Don't say negative 6, 4, because remember it's got to be x minus h. So the center is 6, y minus a negative 4, right? Okay, so the center is 6, negative 4. And the radius is not difficult here. So remember, r squared equals 31. So if I take the square root of both sides, I get the radius to be the square root of 31. And 31 is a prime number, so I can't simplify that. So the radius is equal to the square root of 31. Okay? All right. And then number 4, let's get number 4. So number 4, let's suppose we had this now. All right, number 4. We have 3x squared plus 3x plus 3y squared minus 12y minus 27 equals 0. Okay? All right, now, so remember if you go back to the steps, we have right here 1x squared and 1y squared, and when we talked about general form, we said at some point you want to get a 1x squared and a 1y squared, right? So then you look at this and you see, well, I don't have a 1x squared or a 1y squared. But keep in mind, though, that this is still the equation of a circle. This is the equation of a circle because even though you have x squared, y squared, the coefficients of both x squared and y squared are the same. And that's going to make it the equation of a circle. If they were not the same, then it would be a different situation. It could be an ellipse, okay? Or or if this was a subtraction sign right here, it would be a hyperbola, things like that. But we only deal with circles, so the coefficients are the same. I want a 1 there, right? I want this to be a 1x squared. I want this to be a 1y squared. All you have to do is this. Since the coefficient of x squared and y squared is not 1, we got to make it 1. So to do that, see right now I'm multiplying by 3, right? So you're going to divide every term by 3. So you can divide both sides by 3. So remember, you want x squared and y squared to have a coefficient of 1. Okay? And so divide both sides by 3. All right, so divide both sides by 3. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. So I get 3x squared. And I'm going to go ahead and put the x's together. And it already is. Plus 3y squared minus 12y minus 27 equals 0. So divide both sides by 3. What you do to one side, you do to the other, just like this. Now remember, from previous experiences, you know you can write these as separate fractions, right? So every term is being divided by 3. Every term is being divided by 3. So this is what you have. You have 3x squared divided by 3 plus 3x divided by 3 plus 3y squared divided by 3 minus 12y divided by 3 minus 27 divided by 3, and 0 divided by 3 is 0. So let's go ahead and put a 0 there. And then simplify. Do you all agree that 3's divide out, so you're left with x squared, right? Plus, and then what's 3x divided by 3? Well, that's just x. Plus, y'all agree that's y squared? 12 divided by 3 is 4, so it'll be a minus 4y. And then 27 divided by 3, I'm going to write this as negative 9 equal 0. Okay? So now notice, is x squared and y squared, do they have now a coefficient of 1? Yes. All right, so then let's go ahead now and do step 2. Step 2. Okay, so just keep in mind, if the coefficient of x squared and y squared is not 1, if the second degree terms are not, if the coefficients are not 1, you have to divide both sides by that coefficient. So if that was a 4, you divide both sides by 4. If that was a 5, you divide both sides by 5. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and rewrite this like this. X squared plus x plus some number plus y squared minus 4y plus some number. And then let's add 9 to both sides, so that's going to equal 9. Okay, don't say negative 9, because remember, you got to bring that constant to the other side, so you have to add 9 to both sides. Okay? All right, now, step 2. Take the coefficient of x. What's the coefficient of x right here? That's 1, right? What do I do to that 1? I divide it by 2. And what do I do to that? I square it. Now, can I simplify 1/2? No. So let's go ahead and multiply. What's 1/2 times 1/2? Well, 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. So this becomes 1/4. So I'm going to add 1/4 here, and I add 1/4 here. Okay? So now, if I'm doing this correctly, this trinomial should now be a perfect square trinomial. And it is. So I get x plus, okay, what times itself is 1/4? Well, 1/2. So that should be x plus 1/2. And if you follow this out, if you check it, watch. Go ahead and check it. So say x plus 1/2 times x plus 1/2. Let's go ahead and follow that out. X times x is x squared. The outer is 1/2 x. The inner is also 1/2 x, right? And then 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. Combined like terms, what's a half plus a half? X. A half x plus a half x? Well, that's 1x. So x squared plus x plus 1/4. And in that right here. Okay, so this is correct. Okay, now plus, and then let's go ahead and do this one now. So now I take the coefficient of y, which is negative 4. What do I do to that? I take half of it, whatever that is, I'm going to square it. Can I simplify this? Yes. Negative 4 divided by 2 is a negative 2. Go ahead and do that when you can. And I square it, and then I get a negative 2 times a negative 2, which is a positive 4. What do I do to this number now? I add it to both sides. So say plus 4 plus 4. Okay? If I did this correctly, this trinomial should now be a perfect square trinomial, meaning I can write it as a binomial times itself. And I can, because that's going to be y minus, what times itself is 4? 2. And if you follow it out, you'll get this back. Okay, now let's use a calculator on this, although you can do this in your head very easily because 9 plus 4 is 13, and then 13 plus a fourth is 13 and a fourth, right? But you want to write this back as a improper fraction. So just use your calculator. 9 plus 1 divided by 4 plus 4, okay, equal 13.25, which is 13 and a fourth. And you just go ahead and convert that to a mixed number. And so I'm going to get 13 and 1/4, which we already knew. But, so I'm going to write that here, 13 and 1/4. But remember, you got to rewrite this as an improper fraction. So 13 times 4, okay, and then plus 1 gives me 53. So this is 53 divided by 4. So this becomes 53 divided by 4. So that is the equation of a circle in standard form. So that's standard form. Okay, now what's the center? Well, the center is what? Is the x-coordinate a positive 1/2 or a negative 1/2? It's negative because remember it's x minus h, so x minus a negative 1/2. And then this would be what? 2. Now let's talk about the radius. So remember this right here, that's not the radius. Remember that's r squared. So r squared is 53 divided by 4. So if I want to find r, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And so r will be the square root of 53 divided by the square root of 4. So that becomes the square root of 53 divided by 2. So the radius will be the square root of 53 divided by 2. Okay? All right, so that was number 4. Okay, let's do one more like this. So this will be number 5. All right, number 5. So let's suppose in number 5 we have this. All right, we have 4x squared plus 4y squared minus 8x plus 16y plus 5 equal 0. Okay? All right. Now, I know y'all don't like dealing with fractions, but sometimes you do have to deal with fractions. So we're going to end up with fractions here, but you got to learn how to deal with it. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to ask you, is this the equation of a circle? Yes, it is, because I have an x squared, y squared, and the coefficients are the same. Okay? I can easily get a 1 here by dividing both sides by what number? 4. All right, so this is the equation of a circle. But remember, you want, before you complete the square, remember you're completing the square, to get that standard form, you need the coefficient of x squared and y squared to be 1. So what I'm going to do, just like we did the previous problem, just like we did here, we're going to divide both sides by that coefficient. So the coefficient of x squared is 4, and y squared is 4. They're the same. They have to be the same to be a circle. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. Just like this. All right, I'm going to divide both sides by 4. All right, and then I'm going to rewrite this as separate fractions. So 4x squared divided by 4 plus 4y squared divided by 4 minus 8x divided by 4 plus 16y divided by 4 plus 5/4 equal 0, because 0 divided by 4 is 0. Simplifying this right here becomes x squared plus y squared minus 2x plus 4y plus 5/4 equal 0. Okay? All right, so now I have it in general form. Okay, so let's go ahead and group the x's together, group the y's together. So now we're doing step 1. All right, so I'm going to write this as x squared minus 2x plus some number plus y squared plus 4y plus some number. So we're going to put all the x's together, put all the y's together. And then remember, I got to bring that constant to the other side, so I have to subtract 5/4 from both sides. So it'll be minus 5/4 over here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and complete the square. So completing the square. I take the coefficient of x, which is negative 2. So what do I do to negative 2? I take half of it. And what do I do to that? I square it. Can I simplify this? Yes, because negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And what's negative 1 times itself? A positive 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Don't forget, many students forget about this side. If I'm doing this correctly, this should now be a binomial squared. And it is, because x minus, don't forget this is minus, so this has to be subtraction here. And then what times itself is 1? You get 1. If you follow this out, you get this back. Okay, let's do this one now. So here I take the coefficient of y, this time, which is 4. And what do I do to it? I divide by 2, and whatever that is, I square it. Can I simplify 4 divided by 2? Yes, because that's 2. And then 2 squared is 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. Okay? And so now if I'm doing this correctly, don't forget to say plus, if I'm doing this correctly, I can now write this as a binomial times itself. So this becomes y plus, and then what times itself is 4? 2. And notice that these numbers here come from here. All right, now equal, okay, over here, let's use a calculator with this. I mean, you should be able to do it by hand, but let's just use a calculator, it's quicker. So negative 5 divided by 4 plus, and then 4 and 1's 5, right? Equal this. So that's 3 7/5, which you should know is 3.75, which you should know is 3 3/4, correct? All right, if you didn't, you just say 3 3/4. Okay, so this right here is 3 3/4, but we've got to convert this back to an improper fraction. So 4 times 3 is 12, plus 3 is 15. So again, 15/4. Okay, so that's 15/4 right here. And so there's your answer. So this right here is the equation of the circle in standard form. But they wanted you to also state the center. So what's the center? The center is 1, x minus h. H is 1. Y plus 2 is y minus the negative 2. So k is negative 2. Okay? And the radius is the square root of this. So the radius will be the square root of 15/4. So that's the square root of 15 divided by the square root of 4. So that's the square root of 15 over 2. So the radius will be the square root of 15 divided by 2. All right, so, and you cannot simplify the square root of 15. You can simplify the square root of 4 because that's 2. So you need to simplify whenever you can. All right, so that is the lesson on writing equations of circles going from general form to standard form. All right, so remember, to do that though, you have to be able to complete the square twice on the x's and on the y's. All right, so that's going to take care of this lesson.